So welcome everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are. My name is David Bick, and I am a Vice President with Visualize, and I'm going to be your tour guide for the next 30 to 45 minutes. For those of you who may not know us, Visualize is a very successful value selling partner, and we've had the privilege of implementing value selling with clients on pretty much every continent. Not sure we've done Antarctic yet, but given how good my partners are, it's only a matter of time. It's so great to see so many people that I know on the attendee list, and those folks I want to say, hey, what's up? But we've got a full house for today's call. Standing room only, as I would say, for a webinar is a great thing because it means that the topic we've chosen for this May call is top of mind, and that it's top of mind not just for us, but for all of you. Before I get going, a couple of logistical things for everybody. The slides and the recordings are going to be made available later today on valueselling.com. And we welcome questions during the call. I'm going to triage those questions, and I might address them in the moment, or we might compile them for a number of them for the end of the call. To ask questions, just use the question tab on the GoToWebinar panel, and as my old friend Joel would say, easy peasy lemon squeezy. So we're going to spend time today talking about how to engage your prospects, and the art, if you will, of deliberately asking purposeful questions to achieve our goals in sales. And our goal in sales is typically to convert prospects to customers or to convert suspects to prospects. And in either case, we're going to talk about the different types of questions to use at different stages in your sales cycles. We're going to hone in on the idea of starting with the end in mind as a way to plan our approach. And the questions we must ask are directly related to the objective of the conversation, the meeting, the sales call that you have at any given point in time. So we'll talk about how to understand what are the best questions to ask given your objective and where you are in the sales cycle. So why don't we open with just getting to know each other a little bit better? And probably the best way for me is to start, and here's some aspects of my life outside of work. And so feel free to, in the question panel, just fire off a note and let me know where you're located, or maybe a passion of yours that you pursue outside of work. So for me, top left, that's not my house, but those are the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, Canada, and that's where I live. And you'll see three things that outside of work or when I'm not traveling or spending time with my family, I've got a passion for refereeing basketball, golfing, and cycling. And I see some folks coming in, hey, Fort Myers, Florida, Houston, Toronto, that's awesome. Great to see folks, and I see some golfers. One of the things about basketball that I've noticed, the refereeing in the last number of years is, the last 4 years I've been doing it, is when we talk about communicating, basketball referees, the best ones, are amazing communicators, and it was so insightful for me to see how they communicate to the players, to the coaches, and to each other. Again, it really reinforces the idea of asking great questions, because great referees, they may not have all the answers, but they ask great questions. So if we keep moving forward, and in an homage to Sesame Street, I'm going to say that today's webinar is brought to you by the numbers 71, 30, 31, 40, and the range 46 to 54. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Serious Decisions tells us that 71% of sales reps talk too much. Discovery.org, only 31% of salespeople can effectively connect or communicate with senior executives. HubSpot tells us only 40% of reps are going to make quota. So there's got to be some good news. Well, the good news is that according to Gong.io, and I was at a conference recently in Chicago, 46 to 54, that's the ratio that star performers use in a talk to listen mode with their clients and prospects. Now, when we look at the 71, the 31, and the 40, what it means is that probably the majority of us are not using that 46 to 54, or we're probably not listening more than we're talking. But what this tells us, folks, is this is our why. This is why we're here today, because we want to achieve, we know we've got to stop talking too much, and we know that we've got to connect to senior executives. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, let's take a look at the main thrust of the discussion is going to revolve around the key reasons that good questioning techniques can improve your overall sales effectiveness. Selling is not telling. Selling is not pitching. The topic of the webinar is how to engage, and when you engage, you question and you interact. And it's not what we say, it's what we ask and how we ask it. So we purposely stated in the title that we're going to be asking great questions, and that's critical. Too often we hear the phrase, what does good look like? I hate that phrase. We want to go towards what does great look like. And if today we can get a little bit of the way towards great, then I think it's been a good use of our time. So we're also going to talk about how we make sure that our questioning is conversational and that you're not interrogating your customers or prospects in the process. We're also going to talk a little bit about the context of how customers buy and how we can connect to that understanding of the buying process to help you win more deals. We're going to uncover for you the four or provide insights on the four question types that we advocate as part of the value selling framework, and that we're going to use through our selling process. Right now, you're probably asking a lot of questions in your meetings. You're probably asking a lot of different types of questions, but we're going to give those questions a label so that we're speaking from a common perspective. And that those questions will give us an opportunity to we're going to give ourselves the opportunity to create some specific questions and drive consistency in how we engage. And at the end of it, we're going to touch on some aspects of listening, because if we don't actively listen to all the answers and we get all the good information that we get is going to be lost. Listening is a skill that requires a choice to listen, as well as real concentration to make sure that we stay focused on what's being said and what's not being said by the person on the other end of the phone or across the table from us. So one thing that I've come across in kind of my years, and a realization I came to a lot of years ago, was that we are surrounded by a ton of brilliant people. And I've often used the phrase that we stand on the shoulders of those people who have come before us. So here are four such people that I use the term channel around asking great questions. If you recognize any of these people, why don't you go into the question box and fire off the names and see if let me know if you know who some of these folks are. Now, there's no prizes awarded, unfortunately. So I'm going to get started on the far right because a couple of you have identified Socrates, or as Bill and Ted refer to him, Socrates. And yes, we are all just dust in the wind. So anybody who is not familiar with Socrates, he was an ancient Greek philosopher who was thought to be one of the wisest men of his time. And he wasn't wise because he knew all the answers. He was wise because, well, he promoted thinking by asking questions. The process that he used is called Socratic questioning. And it was proposed by Socrates 2,400 years ago when he taught students that a series of easily answered questions during a dialogue with another person was the best way to come to agreement on an issue. And the process works as well in philosophy as it does in sales. Oprah, easy to recognize, probably one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. I think Oprah's awesome. Oprah asks big, meaningful questions in a straightforward and profound way. Direct, simple, important questions. And what's not to love about that? And guess what? Oprah builds amazing connections with people. A few of you have correctly identified Stephen Covey on the left-hand side, and that's outstanding, although I don't think he gets enough credit these days. And the second from the right is a gentleman named Edgar Schein, and unfortunately nobody identified Edgar, but we are going to be channeling both Stephen and Edgar as we move forward. So what are the outcomes of asking great questions? Well, if we start from the basis that a sales is a communication process and our ability to manage that process is critical, then the person who comes prepared with the best questions will typically be the person who can drive that conversation. And depending upon where you are in the sales cycle and depending upon the relationship that you have with the individual you're calling on, it's going to determine the depth of questioning that you're going to be able to go through. In our case, it's all about effective dialogue. So what do we mean when we say effective dialogue? Well, it's about building trust and rapport. And it's making sure that we've done what we can to establish that trust and rapport. And why is that important? Because we want honest answers. We want true insights from our customers and prospects. And quite frankly, if they don't trust us, they're not going to tell us anything. They're not going to be open with us. So trust and rapport, key to having and keeping great meetings and great relationships. It's all about being seen as relevant. As a result of being relevant, we build credibility. Do we come across as knowing what we're talking about? We don't always have to have the answer and be the expert on everything, but we've got to know enough to ask the questions that we can demonstrate our credibility. And what does credibility mean? It means that we're believable. It means that we're believable in our role as a professional, a sales professional, and that we can add value to the individuals that we're talking to. And we've got to realize that, well, it's about the customer. It's not about us. We need to focus on their interests, their reasons for buying or changing, or what they value. Part of what we need to make sure we understand in our questioning dialogue is, well, whose agenda are we working? We need to know that we have, they're interested in them and we're working towards their agenda. Interestingly, just today I read an article and it talked about research that points to the fact that talking about ourselves, whether in person or in social media, triggers the same pleasure centers as in the brain as the money and food. So my question to the group is, why would we not have other people open up to us so that we can make them feel good about themselves? So here at Value Selling, well, sorry, before I go on, the last thing is 2 ears, 1 mouth. We use them in that order because it's the only way that we're going to learn anything. So the questioning technique that we use at Value Selling, it's pretty straightforward. We've taught sales executives in every corner of the world, and virtually every business-to-business industry, we call it the OPC questioning process. And it's a series of questions that we use to drive those mutually beneficial outcomes in a consistent, repeatable fashion. And they get us to the outcomes that we in sales need. O stands for open, P is for probing, C is confirming. And we're going to define those questions for you, and we're going to talk about how you can use those to maximize your effectiveness. There's not a right or wrong series to the questions. There's a little bit of a technique or a little bit of a process in how we start and how we finish. And we're going to go through the different types of questions in the dialogue and talk about how it is that we actually do that. So let's get going and let's focus on these questions. First one is open questions. And open questions are the ones that are designed to get our customers to talk. They're the how, the why, the tell me about, describe for me types of questions that get our customers speaking about the specific topics that we want them to speak about. Maybe it's about their current situation, what they have to accomplish in the role. Maybe it's about their view of the challenges they face. We could be asking open questions about their budget, their buying process, how they're organized. Open questions don't have a right or wrong answer, and they're all about the customer's view at that point in time. As I said before, it's about their current state and their desired future state. Quite frankly, and I've seen it happen, that open questions can dominate a conversation, certainly in the early stages of a sales call or a relationship. I've been in situations where I've asked or I've seen one of my partners ask a great open question early on and saw that person curiously and actively listen and take notes. And at the end of it, you've got 2 to 3 pages of notes, and they've barely had an opportunity to follow up on clarifying questions or other questions because their open question gave the prospect or the client the opportunity to speak. So yeah, the open question can be very powerful, and we have to give our clients and prospects that platform to speak and be heard because, well, what have they been subject to way too often? A pitch from us the moment we show up. The second type of question that we're going to use are probing questions. These are specific questions that we would ask to fill in any gaps between what we need to know and what we uncover from our open questions. So if I were to ask you an open question about the challenge facing your organization today, and you gave me an answer, you're probably going to give me 2 or 3 things, probably 2 or 3 high-level challenges too. And if I was able to predict, based upon some research I did and your role, that there might be 2, 3 other challenges that you did not know or didn't acknowledge, or maybe didn't anticipate, I would use probing questions to surface those and other challenges. And I'd ask you specifically after identifying those challenges, do you experience these? Do you anticipate that this might be a problem for you? Or is your business or your outcomes challenged because of this? And I'd expect to get a binary answer, yes or no. I might get a maybe, but what we're looking for is a binary yes or no in most cases. Based on those answers, and to make it conversational, again, we think about making things conversational, and to dig deeper, I use a technique called humble inquiry. And this has been coined by our friend Edgar Schein, who was on slide 3, one that nobody knew about. And I would encourage you to grab his book and read it, called Humble Inquiry. But Edgar posits that questions like, can you tell me more about that? Why is that? How do you solve that? Simple questions that allow us to deepen the conversation when we need to go deeper. They're a type of open question, but what we don't want to do is assume that we know what the other person wants or needs. We sometimes really have to clear our minds to maximize our listening. The techniques allow us to access our curiosity, sometimes our ignorance, and ask questions that are the least, we can ask them in the least biased and the least threatening way. So my hope is that you can start to see, and we're going to delve more into the open and probing, but you can start to see how these two questions become really our mechanism to gain a full understanding of what the customer thinks, because that's what's important. And maybe we have to help them recognize aspects of the situation that they've not, they don't fully understand, or they may not have known. And probing questions are the vehicle that we use to impart those industry insights and to be seen as a credible individual and potentially even set us apart from our competition. And in the end, we can build credibility based on the nature of questions that we're asking. The third type of question that we're going to be talking about here is what we call a confirming question. And our confirming questions are really important for a number of reasons. Number one, they give us the opportunity to summarize what we heard. And we know that in active listening, summarizing what we've heard, reflecting back to the person who is speaking, is one of the critical ways that we can demonstrate that we've been listening. The confirming question also provides the opportunity to let the person on the other side of the table clarify, add to, or add on when we play that back to them. So by asking confirming questions throughout the dialogue, it helps us to make sure that we have completely understood and that nothing's been left out inadvertently by us or by them. So confirming questions are often used at the end of the dialogue or at the end of a topic during the dialogue where we play back what we've heard. Now, we can also use confirming questions to open a sales call. And you might be thinking, that sounds a little whack, Dave. Well, think about a sales situation that unfold over time. Probably the majority of us on the phone or on the call today don't have a one call close. So I may open a subsequent call with, look, the last time we spoke, here's what I understood to be the situation and what we reviewed. Did I get that right? Did I miss anything? Is there anything that you would add right now? Again, it's a great way for us to reopen the dialogue because things change over time, and we can use confirming questions to make sure that we're totally in line. And as I said, we're going to have to think about the questions we're going to ask in this type of OPC format for every aspect of the sales process, for understanding what their issues and their problems might be, and to create need for your solutions, to understand what their view of that solution might be, and how you can support that and how you can fit into that, to understand how they're going to measure the impact of that. What's the value? Is it worth solving these issues and problems? Can you demonstrate value, enough value to convince them to take action? And do we understand the process, the players, the timing? And the same types of questions, open, probe, and confirm, can be used at each aspect of the sales process. So as we begin our sales journey, we got to realize that prospects really don't care about our process. They don't care about our products. They don't care about our services. What they care about are their own interests. So we have to get them to open up to us. And my question to the group is, what do you do today to get people to open up to you and have discussions that can build trust, provide a deeper understanding of their situation, and let them speak? And I want to bring you back to slide 3 where we said, remember, 71% of salespeople speak too much. We have to, folks, we have to tap into our inner curiosity and ask our prospect questions to let them describe their current or future states and how aspects of their organization work. Open questions are the non-threatening means of getting people to open. It allows them the chance to be heard and allows us to build conversations. If we channel Stephen Covey, and if anybody knows one of his key 7 habits, it is seek first to understand, then be understood. One of the things that we really want to think about with respect to open questions is the simpler, the better. If you've ever heard somebody ask 4 questions together, 4 process questions in one maybe, people are going to get lost and they're not going to be able to follow you and we're not going to get great answers. So when I think about, so tell me, how do you handle human resource management today? I might be talking to an HR professional. Tell me about your sales productivity challenges you face. Or what are the barriers to your productivity? Those should be separate questions, but too often I've seen that we lump them all together into one big jumbled question. Now, we ask questions like, can you tell me about the current challenges you face in hitting your targets? What might be your vision of the solution? Okay, can you help me understand? Can you quantify the impact to the business of solving those problems? We can use it in any of those 6 conversational elements that value selling tells us that is really important to move things forward. And I don't think that anybody is ever going to say that, wow, that was an amazing question when you ask an appropriate open question. But what you're liable to hear at the end of the conversation was, you know what, I really enjoyed that conversation and I look forward to picking up from there. And you know what, isn't that at the end of the day what we're all striving for? So let's move on to the idea of probing questions. Oh, sorry, one thing I actually forgot was one of the best probing questions or open questions I remember was in a training class I did. And the person who came up with the question, his name was Tony. And Tony's from the Bay Area, former colleague. Tony always wore plaid. And if you're on the call, you know who you are. Tony, when I asked him to give an example, he said, Dave, please tell the jury in your own words what you thought of the hockey game last night. And I thought it was a brilliant question because isn't that really what we want people to do, is just tell us in your own words. What's your view of it? What's your view of things? And it was, again, a brilliant question. If anybody knows Tony, don't tell him I think he's brilliant because it'll go to his head. So let's keep moving on. Probing questions. Probing questions are a little bit more detailed, and this is where we're able to demonstrate our depth of knowledge in the subject area that we're talking about. And if we're selling enterprise solution softwares, for instance, the solutions address a specific set of challenges or issues that your clients face. You can probe specifically for those challenges based upon probing questions that you prepare and ask. And as a result, you have the opportunity to ultimately demonstrate your subject matter expertise without pitching. So recently I was talking to a sales leader, someone who's been very, very successful throughout her career. And she said to me, you know what, Dave, I was always taught never to ask questions that get a yes or no answer. I've always been taught to only answer open-ended questions. You know what? Fair comment. Let's step back and think for a second about when we've got a sales call, prospect call, client call, doesn't matter. How long do we normally have? 30, 45 minutes maybe? How much of that time is actually truly productive time for us to get to the substance? After all the, hey, how you doing? My pen doesn't work, all the wrap up and everything, we might have 20 minutes. So we need to be productive and we need to guide the conversation. And the key to that is to use probing questions. And the key to probing questions is that we don't want those to be the first questions we ask. We always start with open, and we want to get the prospect speaking. And then we use probing questions as a natural follow-on to fill gaps or help diagnose what other things the customer may not have recognized. I know that when I go to my chiropractor, he begins with open questions. How you feeling? What's going on with you movement-wise? And then he gets very specific. And he's looking for yes or no answers to probably diagnose what's going on with me physically. Where do you feel the discomfort? Do you remember when it all started? How does it feel when you move your neck? And invariably, does it hurt when you do this? Yes, no answers. That's what he's looking for. And those probing questions based upon, well, what I may have already answered in the open question really help him to get a more complete understanding of the situation. That if you had just done the open question, how you feeling? My neck and back are sore. Probably not a great thing to work from that kind of pane of glass. So probing questions are extremely powerful in terms of allowing us to dive deeper where we can get extremely purposeful in our questioning process. We can, and I would use another term for this, we can be a little bit surgical in how we approach surfacing needs and creating preference for our offerings. What's that mean? It's really about differentiating. So we want to use these probing questions to surface things that are going to help us ultimately position our products and services valuable and hopefully indispensable. So here are some examples of probing questions, and we can use these throughout the entire sales cycle. We may not be asking probing questions when it comes to understanding the problems they have or the root cause of what's getting in the way of what they want to. And obviously, we're going to probe for the problems that we can solve with our products and services. For instance, if I'm selling training and consulting to B2B firms, I'm not going to ask them about problems that will have things to do with, I don't know, real estate and office space, because we don't address those problems. I focus on asking probing questions around problems they may not have told me about or things that they may not have thought about that I can solve with the value selling framework. One of the nuances of value selling is if we're going to spend all this time asking about the issues, the challenges, the opportunities for improvement that a customer has, don't we, or well, I guess shouldn't we acknowledge that they've probably put some thought into how they think they might need to address these issues? We want to also ask about the solutions, what they view as the solution. So if I'm asking questions, they're not thinking about training, or if they're not thinking about a sales process, or they're not thinking about a powerful communication language to communicate more effectively, I'm going to ask some probing questions around that. things I know that we do an amazing job of solving. The same is true about the other areas of the sales process. We can guide the conversation actively. And in reality, how many of the times do people buy a solution like yours? How often do you sell and implement it? They probably buy it once every year or a couple of years. You sell and implement it every year, every day. So who's the expert? And who knows what it takes? So if we're surfacing problems, another client told us that they were struggling with this particular problem. Is that something you were concerned about? Solution, when we get into their vision of the solution, would it be valuable if you were able to do this or this or this? Would you find value in that? When we think about value, probing questions such as, can you quantify the impact of solving problem A? What about problem B or problem C? And driving down and probing around that with humble inquiry. As I mentioned earlier, these questions can be used to understand the process, the budget, the organization, timing that somebody will ultimately use to make a purchasing decision to do business with you. So open and probing questions can get you through that entire process, and it can get you through effectively and efficiently. So we must prepare ourselves with probing questions to ask in different situations, in different sales calls. And what we do, my question is, what do we do right now to expand the customer or prospect's view of a certain area that you might be discussing beyond just what they answered in the open question? How is it that you right now actively differentiate in the moment? Third piece of questioning, the third type of question that we would use in value selling is called confirming questions. And confirming questions, I think, are sometimes some of the most overlooked questions that we can ask. They're the little hidden gems and the gift that keeps giving for a variety of reasons. I think there's a couple of reasons that we may not use them as most effectively as we could. And I think one of them is that we sometimes don't want to feel like we're parroting or that we're mimicking the client and that we're just playing back what they automatically said. And they're going to say, well, you know what? I just said that. But the reality is, as sales happen over time, and there's a lot of give and go, or there's a lot of give and take as we go back and forth, and there's a ton of nuggets and bits of wonderful information embedded in the conversation, confirming questions are a great way for us to summarize and clarify what we heard and demonstrate that we're actively listening. And you know what? It demonstrates that we're true professionals. And those confirming questions are powerful, not only throughout the sales process, but during a sales call to help understand and transition as we go from one topic to another. Confirming questions can absolutely serve as mini trial closes. Think if you've been talking to a prospect and you've gotten what their issues are, what they have to deliver. Well, we've uncovered the problems and we've probed to add additional problems. And then we've got their view of the solution. And that solution seems aligned to ideally what you can bring to the table and offer them through a business relationship or a partnership. We've got the opportunity to ask that if they had those capabilities that would solve those problems and help them achieve the business issue, would that be good enough to consider doing business with you? That's a mini trial close. We're not asking for the business, but we're just starting to say, are we moving in the right direction? And so think about these confirming questions as great little test points all throughout the sales cycle to see where you're at, to confirm to yourself that you're on the right track. For many of us, sales cycles are 30, 60, 90 days, or even longer. And so somebody's perspective 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days out may have changed. They may have gotten some new information. There's this thing called the interweb. Heck, a competitor could have come in and given them some different perspective or educated them in a different way. So we always want to make sure that we're confirming throughout and continually summarizing to make sure that we have that long-term joint consistent understanding. And it's not just a single point in time understanding. So when we think about confirming questions, again, they're easy questions to ask. Things like, well, we know we've talked about this and that. What I understand is, do I have that right? Did I hear you correctly? Is there anything else? And I can use those confirming questions to lead in a brand new direction or transition to a new area of the sales cycle or a new area of the dialogue that I want to move to. So let me move on. Anxiety questions are the fourth type and sometimes very misunderstood question. And it's the concept that, to a certain extent, anxiety questions are a way of challenging our prospects or promoting new thinking within that prospects. If we think about the world of marketers, they use a lot of questions to get us think and feel about needs where, well, needs may have not existed in the past. You know, they get us to think about things like, what if? And they drive anxiety. Think about insurance. If you don't insure your house with us and something happens, you're going to be living on the street, you're going to be living in a box, and life is going to be horrible. That's the big if. And there are times when we call on our prospects where, well, maybe they don't think they've got a problem. They maybe don't think they've got a reason to change. Or maybe they don't think our solution is appropriate for them for whatever reason. Or the deal that you're working on has stalled. It's in those situations that we need to provoke new thoughts and reshape the person's perspective, or maybe jar them to unstick the deal. And we'll do that with anxiety questions. Anxiety questions can be challenging, and well, they do require us, though, to have a depth of context and the subject matter expertise in order to educate, influence, and raise new thinking. Ideally, we want to use anxiety questions to get the person to focus on the consequences or the implications of not seeing something or not understanding as we would like them to understand. There's a lot of different ways to use anxiety questions. Many clients of ours use specific stories that form the basis of anxiety questions. They've got a tremendous amount of research and insight into their specific market and industry. And if we can tap into those to use a question to open up and get the client to think about things that, well, are going to impact their outcomes. We can think that if 75% of the universe has experienced a specific problem and this customer does acknowledge that, what are going to be the implications if they're wrong or if they've overlooked something or missed something? So using those stories or research are going to leverage our experiences, and it's going to drive that level of anxiety. From my experience, I've used anxiety questions a number of different ways and in a number of different prospects. And in some cases, well, it may cause anxiety and it may risk rapport. And quite frankly, some cases, we may not care if it risks rapport, but it comes down to how you ask and how you bring them to that realization. There are a number of places that we specifically helpful in the sales cycle. Number one, one of the principles of value selling is that people need a reason to change. And unfortunately, that reason to change, well, isn't just that they're currently not doing business with you. Yeah, we've all seen a situation where we've called on a prospect who, well, they may be completely satisfied with the status quo. Maybe they're overconfident. Maybe they're incompetent. I didn't say that out loud, did I? But for whatever reason, they don't recognize that there may be a better way to do something where we could add more value to them and their business. And in those situations, anxiety questions might be very, very effective to get their attention and get them to change their thinking. Another key place where anxiety questions might make sense is where your customer is envisioning a solution that is completely different than the one you bring to the table. And we've all known that in every problem, there's multiple ways to solve problems. You represent a company, a product, a service that has a specific way to address a specific set of problems. You may have a multitude of ways to address that, but when you get a sense or know or confirm that a customer sees a competitive alternative, whether it's doing it themselves, doing it with a competitor, well, an anxiety question could be a very good way to get them thinking and to break that competitive match that they have with somebody else. Another area where an anxiety question can be very helpful is in creating urgency. At value selling, we're all about helping our prospects build a business case with their executives that's believable and that helps them answer the question, is the investment worth it? Am I going to get X times my investment in return? And at the end of the day, that's what value selling is all about, is helping people determine the worth, whether it's worth to do business with you. Well, anxiety questions can be used to drive that sense of urgency. Sometimes we have questions that, well, clients that may seem ready, they think we're great, they think we're nice, but the deal kind of stalls and we don't know why it stalled. Maybe they're just not motivated, or they don't see the sense of urgency to take action. And anxiety questions along the lines of, so what are the implications of not getting this going now and not hitting your targets? Can be ways that we can unstick our prospects. So we're 34 minutes into the call, and I wanted a couple of slides to wrap us through to some questions and help us kind of put a bow on things. Conversation versus interrogation. Well, number one, this is not rapid firing questions. We've already talked that we need to build a cadence. If you think about a heartbeat cadence, it's got to be some back and forth According to Gong.io, remember 46 to 40, 54% listening, 46% talking. It's like a game of tennis. We volley, we volley, we volley. So we've got to build that cadence into our approach. We have to be able to respond to the actual answer, so we have to be able to listen, and we respond accordingly. So we give people the chance to open up to us, and we confirm, and that allows us to push forward with a common understanding. There's got to be a trade-off, as I mentioned before, between open and probing questions. Open questions will give us their view of the world. Probing questions help guide and govern the conversation, and ideally, it moves us towards things that we can uniquely deliver for these customers or for our prospects. We think about why. Well, why not? And then we build with, can you tell me more about that? Remember the picture of Edgar Schein? He looks like a pretty humble, unassuming guy. That's the type of question we want to ask. So when we think about asking questions, there's a couple of tactical things that we need to think about. And there's a couple of ways that I see sometimes folks stub their toe. And there's one little tip at the end that I picked up from somebody at a conference I went to in Chicago. Number one is please ask questions that are easy to ask and easy to answer. I can remember getting myself into a big jam with a CIO one time in a very first meeting, and my very first question was convoluted, long, and almost unintelligible. What I can tell you is 20 minutes into that meeting, I was asked to leave. So let's make our questions easy to ask, easy to answer. Compound questions. When we put multiple themes into one question, there's no way people can answer that. And if they do try to answer it, there's no way they can answer it accurately. Chunk out your questions. Make them easy. Number three is ask and answer. One of my favorite podcasts is Freakonomics, and I love it, and I love the host. But one of the things that he does that makes me a little bit nutty is he asks a question, an open question, and then he gives the guest two options. And he really narrows it down when it should be an open question. The example could be 16 games into the season, he might be talking to an athlete and he'll say, so tell me about how, what your best performances are this year. Was it game number 1 or game number 4? Well, he's seeding the answer when in fact what we're asking is an open question. Last little tip I picked up from, a conference in Chicago was ask, then drink. And no, I don't mean anything that you shouldn't be drinking in a sales situation. I'm talking about water, coffee, tea, or Gatorade, something like that. And the tip was when you ask a question, take a drink, because that allows the person on the other end a chance to actually listen or think for a second, because we hate dead air. So take a drink. Nobody can ask a question with their mouth full, and if you try to, it's a little bit of an ugly situation. So practice that one. Ask a question, take a drink, give the person on the other end of the line a chance to respond. Keys to our success, number one, we've got to prepare. This is nothing new. We've got to prepare. We've got to prepare our questions in advance based upon the context of the individual that we're talking to. Execution has to be conversational and natural, which means that we've got to practice. So we prepare and we practice. And last but not least is we've got to be able to listen. So we're going to ask good questions. And we're going to ask open questions, which gives our prospect a chance to be heard. We're going to ask probing questions so that we can be purposeful in how we create, need, and differentiate. We're going to confirm so that we've got a shared mutual understanding. And last but not least, we're going to effectively and efficiently use anxiety questions, which can unstick deals, move over confident people, or open up a new path on our deals. So I love cartoons, and I love cartoons simply because, well, they say life imitates art, but in this case, art imitates life. And I think for every time we've seen somebody do something that looks really natural, really simple, really at ease, I think about some of the senior basketball officials that I work with. What I know is that there has been a ton of work gone into that, the preparation that they do. They show up early for the game. They know the teams. They work with their partners, and they are spot on. So my ask of you is, we as salespeople, why can't we do the same thing? So your action plan. Before your next call, create some specific probing questions. I will tell you, open questions and confirming questions, they're easy. The harder lifting or the heavier lifting is creating probing questions. because they're based on your differentiators. Focus on the prospect. Focus on what's happening on the other side of the table. Understand their reasons for buying. Understand their perspective. Use open questions to get things going. Confirm, confirm, confirm. And lastly, please listen. So I'm going to turn it over a couple of questions right now while we've got a few minutes, because I do want to give you time back in your day. I've got 20 minutes to the top of the hour. I do see some questions. I'm not sure how much time we'll have. I've got two that have come in to me from some folks that I actually do know. First question is, how many questions should we ask? And that long ago, or that reminds me of the, and I think it was Lincoln who was asked, how long should a man's legs be? And his answer was, long enough to touch the ground. So ironically enough, the same conference where I got the ask and drink comment was, I think it was Gong.io said, in an ideal discovery call, we should ask between 11 and 14 questions. For whatever it's worth, don't know the length of it, but they said the most successful reps ask between 11 and 14. And it was interesting because I looked at, for those of you who know the value selling approach well, if we think about the business issue, the problem, the solution, which is discovery, and we're building a vision match, that's roughly 10 to 14 questions right there. So what would I advocate? Somewhere in that range. Remember, there's got to be a cadence, give and take, question and answer, build a conversation. So I hope that helps. The next one was, where does storytelling fit? And that is a great question, because we hear so much these days about storytelling. And where I would say storytelling fits early on is we tell a story as part of our credibility introduction to show the person that, well, we are professional, that we, our organization is innovative. We're problem solvers, that we can connect to the challenges that you have at whatever your level is. But as we build out our problem questions, our problem probing questions, or solution probing questions, we can tell little mini stories in each of those. When we think about a problem probing question, it's, we were working with another company, and they found that they had a problem of this and this that caused them to have this net effect. Do you see that as a problem that might crop up here? And in the solution area, when we're talking about the solution, we could say, another client we were working with deployed this, this, and this, and they found that they were able to do this. Would you see value from that? We can even build up questions it came up the other day in a workshop where they talked about how do we maybe get the plan moving quicker. And it could be a probing question as simple as, we were working in another situation last year where the levels of authority had actually changed, and the person that we were working with didn't know it. Actually, not a lot of people in the organization didn't know it. And what ended up happening was they had to scramble like heck to get the deal done. They almost missed a critical window, and as a result, almost missed hitting their targets. So storytelling absolutely, absolutely fits in, but again, you've got to be surgical about where you use it. We advocate very early as you build credibility into your introduction, and then we can use them judiciously through the use of those probing questions. Probing questions can hold those little stories in them. So with that, what I will promise to do is the folks who have sent out questions to me, I will get back to you. I will answer those questions directly. I do want to give you time back in your day. I find myself in Amsterdam right now, and it is 7:43 in the evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say thank you to everybody for attending the call. I really appreciate everything. I appreciate you asking the questions and your engagement. And I'm going to go get me some sushi. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, evening, afternoon.